The sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors echoed through the modest Chicago apartment as 4-year-old Emma clutched her worn teddy bear, tears streaming down her rosy cheeks. "Please don't leave us," she whispered to the woman packing her suitcase by the door, not knowing that her father, the man she called Daddy Mike, who wore paint-stained jeans and made her breakfast every morning, was actually Michael Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, worth $2.8 billion. The afternoon light filtered through the thin curtains of the third-floor walk-up in Lincoln Park, casting long shadows across the living room where Sarah Chen had spent countless hours reading bedtime stories, helping with puzzle pieces, and watching Emma's face light up with wonder at the simplest things. The apartment smelled like the cinnamon French toast Mike had made that morning, French toast that had gone cold when Sarah discovered the stack of overdue bills tucked behind the kitchen counter, each red stamp feeling like a punch to her stomach. Sarah had been the nanny for exactly 47 days, and in those 47 days, she'd fallen in love. Not with the modest paycheck that barely covered her student loans, not with the cramped 2-bedroom apartment that somehow felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived, but with the little girl who asked her to braid her hair every morning and the single father who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders while still finding time to make silly voices during bedtime stories and dance to Disney songs in the kitchen while dinner cooked. But love wasn't enough to pay the bills she'd found. The final eviction notice dated for next week. The disconnection warning for utilities. The stack of medical bills with Emma's name that made her hands shake as she read the amounts. Amounts that would take Mike years to pay off on a construction worker's salary. Amounts that explained why he sometimes looked so tired, why he worked such long hours, why he bought generic cereal and counted every dollar twice before spending it. The autumn rain pelted against the windows as Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, her heart breaking at the sight of the child's trembling lower lip. Emma's enormous brown eyes, so much like her father's, stared up at her with a trust that made Sarah's chest tighten with guilt and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to the kind of love that could destroy you if you let it. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups have to make really hard decisions," Sarah said softly, brushing Emma's dark curls away from her tear-stained face. She could smell the strawberry shampoo she'd helped wash from Emma's hair the night before, could feel the warmth of the small body that had curled up next to her during movie nights, could remember every sleepy, "I love you, Sarah," that had been whispered against her shoulder during afternoon naps. "Why can't you stay?" Emma's voice cracked as she wrapped her small arms around Sarah's neck, her teddy bear squished between them. "Did I do something wrong? I promise I'll eat all my vegetables. I promise I won't ask for extra stories. I promise I'll be the best girl in the whole world." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She'd quit her job at the high-end preschool in River North to take this position, drawn by something in Mike's tired eyes during the interview when he'd explained that Emma's mother had left when she was just 2 months old. She'd believed his story about working double shifts at a construction company, about struggling to pay for childcare, about just needing someone who would love his little girl while he tried to build a better life for them both. Mike Harrison stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom, watching the scene unfold, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He'd been Michael Harrison, billionaire CEO, for exactly 10 hours each day for the past month. Business suits, board meetings, and decisions that moved millions of dollars across international markets. But for the other 14 hours, he was just Mike, a single dad who made dinosaur-shaped pancakes and sang off-key lullabies, desperately trying to find someone who could love his daughter without knowing about the fortune that made him question everyone's motives. The test had been simple in concept, devastating in execution. Live as a regular working father, hire a nanny through normal channels, and see if anyone could care about Emma for who she was, not what she represented. The modest apartment was real. He'd bought the building 6 months ago and had been living in the smallest unit, complete with second-hand furniture and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. The struggles were manufactured but felt authentic as he played the role of a man barely making ends meet, counting quarters for laundry and shopping at discount grocery stores. What he hadn't expected was Sarah Chen, 26 years old with student debt and dreams of opening her own childcare center someday, who looked at Emma like she was the most precious thing in the world and treated Mike like he was worth something more than his paycheck. Sarah, who stayed late without asking for overtime pay when Emma had a fever. Sarah, who brought homemade soup when Mike claimed he was too tired to cook. Sarah, who read Goodnight Moon in different voices for each character and taught Emma to make friendship bracelets and listened with genuine interest to every rambling 4-year-old story about imaginary dragons and flying dogs. "You haven't done anything wrong, baby girl," Sarah whispered, her own tears beginning to fall. "You're perfect. You're the most perfect little girl in the whole world, and anyone would be lucky to take care of you." Her voice caught on the words, because they were true. Emma was extraordinary, with her infectious giggle and her habit of sharing her toys with invisible friends, and her way of asking profound questions like, "Why do grown-ups forget how to see magic?" Mike stepped into the room, his heart pounding as he watched the two people who had become his entire world saying goodbye. For 6 weeks, he'd experienced something he'd never had before, a home where people cared about each other simply because they were family, not because of net worth or stock options or business connections. He'd watched Sarah teach Emma to plant seeds in small pots on the fire escape, turning their tiny outdoor space into a garden that Emma checked every morning for signs of growth. He'd seen Sarah's face light up when Emma drew pictures of their family, stick figures holding hands with Sarah, written in crayon letters, always placing herself right between Daddy and Emma. "Sarah?" Mike's voice was rough as sandpaper, thick with emotions he couldn't name. "Can we talk, please, after Emma goes to bed?" But Sarah shook her head, standing up with trembling legs. "I can't, Mike. I can't make this harder than it already is." She looked around the apartment that had somehow become home in just 6 weeks, at the couch where they'd watched movies together, at the kitchen table where they'd shared countless meals, at the corner where Emma's art supplies lived in organized chaos. "I found the bills, all of them. And I understand now why you work so many hours, why you look so tired all the time." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and broken dreams. Emma looked back and forth between the adults, confusion clouding her features as she sensed the weight of something she couldn't understand. "The thing is," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I love you both too much to watch you struggle while I take money you don't have. You need someone who can afford to work for what you can pay, not someone who needs a real salary to survive. Emma deserves better than someone who'll have to leave eventually anyway when her own money runs out." She picked up her suitcase, avoiding Mike's eyes because she knew if she looked at him, really looked at him, she'd lose her resolve. She'd see the man who'd held her hand during thunderstorms when Emma was scared, who'd kissed her goodnight like she was the most precious thing in his world, who'd made her believe in the kind of love she'd only read about in books. "I'll find work that pays better," Sarah said, kneeling down to hug Emma one last time. "And your daddy will find someone wonderful to take care of you, someone who can give you everything you deserve." But as she walked toward the door, Emma's voice stopped her cold. "Sarah, are you leaving because we're poor? Because Daddy says being poor doesn't make you bad. He says the most important things can't be bought in stores." The 3 weeks that followed felt like the longest of Emma's young life. She stopped eating her cereal in the mornings, arranging the pieces in perfect rows but never lifting the spoon to her mouth. She started sleeping with every stuffed animal she owned, building a fortress of fur and fabric around herself as if she could create a barrier against any more loss. She asked Mike 17 times a day when Sarah was coming back, And each time he had to explain, in four-year-old terms, that sometimes people had to leave to take care of their own problems, that it didn't mean they didn't love you, that sometimes loving someone meant doing what was hard instead of what felt good. What he couldn't explain was how he found himself driving past the coffee shop where Sarah had taken a new job, watching through the window as she smiled at customers with the same warmth she'd shown Emma, wondering if she thought about them too. He couldn't explain how he'd started keeping his phone next to his bed, hoping she might call to check on Emma, maybe even ask how he was doing. He couldn't explain how he'd almost blown his own cover a dozen times, wanting to fix everything with a single phone call to his accountant, wanting to tell her the truth about who he really was, and how none of the money problems were real. But the test had to be real. If Sarah came back because he could solve her financial problems, he'd never know if she truly cared about them or just saw an opportunity. If she returned because Emma needed her, because Mike needed her, because the three of them had created something worth fighting for, then he'd know he'd found something money couldn't buy. The bills he'd planted were cruel, but necessary props. The medical statements for Emma's imaginary health issues, the overdue rent notices for an apartment he owned outright, the utility disconnection warnings that would never be enforced. Each piece of paper was a lie that felt like truth, because in some ways they were struggling, just not financially. They were struggling to find authentic connection in a world where everyone wanted something from them. Mike hired a new nanny through the same agency, a pleasant woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who was perfectly qualified and utterly professional. She kept Emma fed and clean and safe, read to her from the prescribed reading list, and followed every instruction to the letter. Emma tolerated her with the resignation of a child who'd learned that adults left, but she didn't sparkle the way she had with Sarah. She didn't chatter endlessly about her day, or make up songs about her breakfast, or ask for just one more story at bedtime. "I miss Sarah," Emma told Mike one evening as he tucked her into bed, her voice small and serious. "Do you miss her too, Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart," Mike admitted, smoothing her dark hair across the pillow. "I miss her too, Mrs. Rodriguez is nice," Emma continued thoughtfully, "but she doesn't know how to make the voices for the books, and she doesn't know that I like my sandwiches cut in triangles, not squares. And she doesn't know that when I'm sad, I need extra hugs, not space to think about my feelings." The observation cut deep because it was true. Sarah had learned Emma's needs and preferences not through professional training, but through genuine attention and care. She'd known to bring crackers when Emma's stomach hurt, to sing softly when nightmares struck, to celebrate small victories like successful potty trips and completed puzzles with the enthusiasm of someone who truly invested in Emma's happiness. Sarah, meanwhile, was discovering that her new job at an upscale cafe in the Gold Coast paid twice what the nannying position had offered, but felt like dying a slow death every single day. The customers were polite but distant. The work was mindless, and every evening when she went home to her studio apartment in Wicker Park, she found herself wondering what Emma had for dinner, whether Mike had remembered to pack her lunch, if anyone was reading her Goodnight Moon in the voice she'd perfected for each character. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, too clean. There were no toys scattered across the floor. No drawings taped to the refrigerator, no small shoes kicked off by the door. Sarah had grown accustomed to the beautiful chaos of life with Emma. The constant questions, the sticky fingers on everything, the way a simple trip to the grocery store could turn into an adventure story about brave shoppers and friendly vegetables. She'd tried to convince herself that leaving had been the right choice. Mike needed someone who could afford to work for what he could pay. Emma needed stability, not someone who would have to leave eventually anyway when the money ran out. But at night, staring at the ceiling of her apartment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Her sister Jessica called every few days, trying to cheer her up with stories about her own kids and updates about family drama, but Sarah found it hard to focus on anything that didn't involve a 4-year-old with curly hair and brown eyes. She'd caught herself buying strawberry shampoo at the store, the same brand she'd used to wash Emma's hair, before remembering that she had no reason to have it anymore. "You're miserable," Jessica observed during one of their calls. "I can hear it in your voice. Why don't you just call them, check in? You don't have to go back to work for them, but maybe knowing how they're doing would help." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to make that call. What would she say? That she missed them so much it felt like physical pain? That she dreamed about braiding Emma's hair and woke up disappointed? That she'd started and deleted 17 text messages to Mike, each one seeming either too casual or too intense? The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening when Jessica called with news that changed everything. "I found something weird about that family you were working for," Jessica said, her voice carrying that tone she got when she'd fallen down an internet rabbit hole. "The address you gave me? I was curious, so I looked it up. That building is owned by Harrison Industries. And Sarah, you're not going to believe this, but the CEO is a guy named Michael Harrison, and he has a 4-year-old daughter named Emma." Sarah's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto her kitchen table as the pieces of the puzzle rearranged themselves in her mind. The expensive watch Mike sometimes forgot to take off before bed. The way he seemed to know things about business and economics that didn't make sense for a construction worker. The private preschool Emma had mentioned attending before Daddy's job changed. The medical bills that didn't make sense if he had good insurance through a construction company. The way he sometimes answered his phone with a professional tone that didn't match his casual appearance. She spent the next 3 hours on her laptop, staring at photos of Michael Harrison at charity galas and business conferences, wearing $1,000 suits and smiling the same smile she'd seen when he watched Emma chase pigeons in Lincoln Park. The same eyes that had looked so tired and worried when he'd interviewed her for the nanny position. The same hands that had built countless blanket forts and packed carefully labeled snacks for preschool. The anger came first. How dare he lie to her? How dare he make her believe they were struggling when he could probably buy the entire neighborhood without thinking twice? How dare he put her through the agony of leaving when he could have simply paid her what she needed to stay? But as the hours passed and Sarah's shock faded, understanding began to take its place. A billionaire's daughter would never have a normal childhood, never know if people liked her for herself or for what her father could provide. Every friendship would be tainted by the possibility of ulterior motives. Every caregiver would be suspect. And a billionaire single father would never know if someone truly loved his child or just saw an opportunity for financial gain. The test made perfect sense, even if it had nearly destroyed all of them in the process. Mike hadn't been testing her professional capabilities or her childcare skills. He'd been testing her heart, and she'd passed, even if it meant failing in every other way that mattered. Friday morning found Sarah standing outside the same apartment building where she'd spent the happiest 6 weeks of her adult life, her heart hammering against her ribs as she climbed the familiar stairs. She could hear Emma's voice through the thin walls, talking to someone, probably Mrs. Rodriguez, about something that had happened at preschool, and the sound made her chest ache with longing and determination in equal measure. The hallway smelled like the cleaning supplies the superintendent used every Thursday, mixed with the faint aroma of someone cooking dinner somewhere nearby. Sarah had climbed these stairs countless times, usually laden with grocery bags or art supplies or small surprises for Emma, always eager to see the little face that would peek around the doorframe the moment she heard footsteps. She knocked. 3 soft raps that used to mean Sarah's home in their little family routine. The sound echoed in the hallway, followed by the scrambling of small feet and Emma's excited voice calling, "Maybe it's Sarah. Maybe Sarah came back." The footsteps that approached were definitely Mike's, slower and heavier than Emma's excited scrambling. When the door opened, Sarah found herself looking into the face of the man she'd fallen in love with, not the billionaire CEO, not the struggling construction worker, but the father who'd spent an entire Saturday afternoon teaching Emma to ride a bicycle in the courtyard, who'd held Sarah's hand while they watched Disney movies after Emma fell asleep, who'd kissed her good night like she was the most precious thing in his world. "Sarah?" Mike's voice caught in his throat, hope and fear warring in his expression. He was wearing the same paint-stained jeans and faded t-shirt she remembered, but now she could see the expensive cut of his hair, the quality of his watch, the small details that marked him as someone with means far beyond what he'd claimed. "Is Emma here?" Sarah asked, her own voice barely steady. "There's something I need to tell both of you." Emma appeared at Mike's side as if summoned by magic, her face lighting up like Christmas morning. "Sarah, you came back. Did you come back to stay? Please say you came back to stay." She launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Sarah's waist with the fierce desperation of a child who'd been waiting for this moment every day for 3 weeks. "Can I come in?" Sarah asked, looking over Emma's head to meet Mike's eyes. "We need to talk." They sat in the living room where Sarah had read hundreds of bedtime stories, where Mike had taught her to play chess on quiet Sunday evenings, where Emma had built elaborate cities out of blocks while narrating complex storylines about the people who lived there. The space felt exactly the same and completely different, charged with the weight of truth that needed to be spoken. Mrs. Rodriguez had left for the day, her absence making the apartment feel more like the home Sarah remembered. Emma settled herself between Sarah and Mike on the couch, one small hand on each of their knees, as if she could physically keep them all together through sheer determination. "I know who you are," Sarah said simply, looking directly at Mike. "I know about Harrison Industries. I know about the money. I know this was all a test." Emma looked between the two adults, confusion clouding her features. "What test? Are we playing a game? Can I play too?" Mike's face went pale, then red, then pale again. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap, and Sarah could see him struggling with how much to reveal, how much truth Emma could handle at her age. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, but she held up her hand. "You don't need to explain," Sarah interrupted. "I understand why you did it. If I had a daughter, if I had to worry about people using her to get to me, I probably would have done the same thing." She took a shaky breath, her eyes never leaving his face. "But I need you to understand something too." She turned to Emma, whose small face was scrunched up in concentration as she tried to follow the adult conversation. "Emma, do you remember when I used to read you stories about princesses, and how the princesses always had to figure out who really loved them and who just wanted their crowns?" Emma nodded solemnly, her curls bouncing with the movement. "The mean people only wanted the shiny things, but the good people loved the princess, even when she was wearing regular clothes." "That's right, baby girl. And your daddy was worried that people might only want to be your friend because he has a lot of shiny things. So he pretended he didn't have them, to see if I liked you just because you're you. But you do like me just because I'm me, right?" Emma's eyes were wide with sudden understanding and worry. "You don't care about shiny things." "I love you because you're you," Sarah said firmly, reaching out to touch Emma's cheek. "I love you because you make up songs about your stuffed animals, and because you always share your cookies, and because you give the best hugs in the whole world. I love you because you have the kindest heart, and the biggest imagination, and the most beautiful laugh. I love you because when you see a butterfly, you whisper hello to it like it's your friend." She looked back at Mike, whose eyes were suspiciously bright. "And I fell in love with your daddy because he makes dinosaur pancakes and sings silly songs and reads the same bedtime story 17 times in a row without complaining, because he's patient and funny and kind, because he loves you so much that he was willing to pretend to be poor just to make sure you'd have people in your life who care about you for the right reasons." "So, why did you leave?" Mike asked quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "If you knew we cared about each other." "Because I thought you were struggling," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "I found the bills, Mike, the ones you planted to make the financial situation look real. And I thought if I stayed, I'd be selfish. I thought you needed someone who could afford to work for almost nothing, not someone who needed a real salary to pay her student loans and help her family. I thought Emma deserved stability, not someone who would have to leave when her own money ran out. The silence that followed was broken only by Emma's small voice. So are you staying now? Now that you know Daddy has lots of shiny things? Are you going to be my mommy for real? Sarah laughed, the sound caught between tears and joy. I'm staying if your daddy wants me to stay, not because of the shiny things, but because the two of you are my family. Because I can't imagine my life without bedtime stories and dinosaur pancakes and someone who builds the most amazing blanket forts in the whole world. Mike was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face as if trying to memorize every detail. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, as if he was afraid the wrong word might shatter the fragile hope building between them. The job offer stands, he said finally, but not as a nanny. As Emma's mom, if you want it. As my wife, if you'll have me. As part of our family for real this time. No more tests or pretending or hiding who we are. Will you marry my daddy? Emma asked with 4-year-old directness, bouncing slightly on the couch. Because I already picked out my flower girl dress in my head, and it's really pretty. It's pink with sparkles and it has a big bow. Sarah looked around the apartment that had never felt like home until she'd lived there with them, at the man who'd shown her what real love looked like, even while pretending to be someone else, at the little girl who'd taught her that family wasn't about blood or money, but about choosing to love someone every single day. Yes, she said simply, yes to all of it. The months that followed were a whirlwind of revelation and adjustment. Mike gradually revealed the truth about his wealth, but he did it carefully, in ways that wouldn't overwhelm Emma or change the essential dynamic of their family. They moved to his real home, a beautiful but not ostentatious house in Lincoln Park, with a yard big enough for Emma to have a swing set and a vegetable garden, but they kept the same routines, the same traditions, the same simple pleasures that had made them happy in the tiny apartment. Sarah met Mike's sister and her family, navigating the complex world of wealthy relatives who were curious about the nanny who'd become family. She learned about charity galas and board meetings, about the responsibility that came with serious money and the way it could isolate you from real human connection if you weren't careful. But more importantly, she learned about Mike's history with Emma's mother, a socialite who'd married him for his money and left when motherhood proved less glamorous than she'd imagined. She understood why he'd been so desperate to find someone who would love Emma unconditionally, why the test had been necessary, even if it had nearly broken them all. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the garden of their home, wearing a simple white dress and watching her soon-to-be husband help their daughter scatter rose petals down the aisle. Emma took her job as flower girl very seriously, pausing to arrange each petal with artistic precision while the small gathering of family and friends waited with patient smiles. The wedding was small by billionaire standards, but perfect by family standards. Mike's sister and her kids, Sarah's parents who'd flown in from Portland, a few close friends who'd known Mike long enough to remember when he'd been lonely, even surrounded by business associates and charity galas. No media, no society photographers, no one who cared more about the net worth of the groom than the happiness of the bride. As Mike and Sarah exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about pancakes and bedtime stories, and building blanket forts even when they were old and grey, Emma stood between them, holding both their hands, officially becoming what she'd already been in their hearts, a family. Do you promise to love Emma like she's your own daughter forever and ever? Emma had insisted on adding her own vow to the ceremony, standing on a small platform so she could reach the microphone. I promise, Sarah said solemnly, looking into Emma's serious brown eyes, to love you both for exactly who you are, forever and ever. And do you promise to make dinosaur pancakes even when you're really old? Emma continued, making the gathered guests chuckle. I promise to make dinosaur pancakes until my hands are too shaky to hold the spatula, Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "And then I'll teach you to make them for your own kids." Ajatum, and in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Mike Harrison realized that the test had worked better than he'd ever imagined. He'd found someone who loved them not despite their wealth or because of it, but completely separate from it. Someone who'd fallen in love with a construction worker making dinosaur pancakes and chosen to stay with a billionaire CEO for exactly the same reasons. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Emma grew up understanding that they had more money than most families, but also understanding that what made them special wasn't their wealth, but their love for each other. She attended excellent schools, but came home to the same cozy routines, the same silly songs, the same bedtime stories that had shaped her earliest memories. Sarah opened her own childcare center, using Mike's resources, but building something that was entirely her own vision, a place where children were valued for their curiosity and kindness rather than their parents' bank accounts. Emma helped sometimes, teaching younger children how to make friendship bracelets and sharing her favorite books with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious stories could be. And Mike learned to balance his business responsibilities with his role as husband and father, never again allowing work to consume so much of his life that he missed the important moments. He discovered that being genuinely happy made him a better leader, that having a real family to come home to gave him perspective on what actually mattered in the world. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as ordinary moments: a 4-year-old's desperate plea, a nanny's selfless choice, a father's willingness to give up everything to find something real. Sometimes love looks like leaving when you think it's best for someone else, and sometimes it looks like coming back when you realize you all belong together. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, but only shared between people who choose to love unconditionally, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we believe that every ending can be a new beginning, that family is about choice as much as chance, and that sometimes the best things come to those who are brave enough to remove their masks and love with their whole hearts. Until next time, keep believing in the power of authentic love and keep building the kind of home where everyone belongs.